All right. Thank you all for joining us. Good morning, good evening, whichever part of the world you're in. Very excited to be here. I'm Romit. I'm one of the co-leads for Web3 investments at Lightspeed. We're a global fund investing in crypto since the last 10 years, 100 plus portfolio companies, and very proud to partner with LayerZero as well. I have here today with me Brian, who's of course the founder and CEO of LayerZero. Brian, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here, and should be fun.
Awesome. Brian, let's kick it off. For the folks who are watching us, tell us a little bit about your journey, and especially would love to understand the genesis of the idea for Layer Zero. How did that come about?
Sure. So my journey is kind of long and winding. I think most people have heard some version of it before, so I won't dive into too much. But basically, I got into crypto 2013 for that specifically, mining Bitcoin in my garage, doing all of that. Left for a few years, came back in 2016, 2017, mostly just on the trading side, interacting with everything. 2018, 2019 comes and like there's smart contracts, like actual things are happening. My background was computer science, despite dropping out of school. And so we really started to like me and two of my friends, my co-founders of the company, were playing around with this. We got asked by a hedge fund to implement some trading strategies on some of the first on-chain dexes. So this is IDEX and Ether Delta kind of back in the day. Did that, realized that nobody had any idea what they were doing at all at the time, and thought it was really interesting. So we started writing ARB, triangle ARB strategies, like just basic on-chain stuff, playing with propagating data on-chain. Everything was speed then, so we were like stripping apart Geth for custom node discovery, doing all of this interesting kind of like network level stuff. And then started to see transactions pop up in blocks with perfect block positioning and zero gas paid, which meant the miners were colluding against us. It was a rigged game that we couldn't win anymore. So we had to find something new to do. And at that time, Binance Smart Chain, now BNB Chain, was really going insane. It was like really the earliest inception of this. And every day we were kind of getting messages of like more volume than Ethereum, more users than Ethereum. That was like a real anomaly, right? It'd been around for like, I'd been around for 8 years at the time, 10 years now. And like other chains existed, but nobody actually used them or did anything on them. So it was like very unique. And so we started asking ourselves, like, what would you do if you had this execution environment that was fast and cheap? Maybe you lose some of the security properties, and then you also have Ethereum, which is like secure, but at the time just overwhelmingly expensive. Everyone was complaining about fees every day, and so we actually designed a game. Was like our first thing. It was just like a game where you would have kind of gameplay on this one chain. Everything that lived there would be ephemeral and die. But if you achieved a certain thing, you would mint an NFT back to Ethereum, and that would be the state of permanence. So that would like hold state. We just built this for fun. It was just a thing we were building on our own. And when we built this, we realized there was no way to actually trigger events on both chains without having a central coordinator that sat outside and did this. And like, if you have a central coordinator, what's the point of using a blockchain anyways? This is like entirely centralized. But we were like, surely somebody has solved this. Like bridges exist, like this, there has to be, this has to be done. And we really started looking around at like what existed for bridges, and we're just like horrified by this state of security and sort of like everything that was happening there. So we started building what we thought was a better bridge. This was a precursor to Stargate with this really strong thesis around wrapped assets basically be a peril mechanism to transfer user value, and the fact that most of the volume would be driven at the application level, not at the individual user using the bridge themselves. So we built this mechanism for that, realized very quickly that we still had this central coordinator to trigger events on both chains. And so we had to reinvent this transport layer. And it became very apparent very quickly that like the transport layer, like that was the generalized problem. That's what we kind of needed to solve. And that became layer zero.
Brian, thanks for that story. And I think that covers some part of what I was going to ask you next. You've spoken a lot about interoperability, and I'm sure there's an evolution of your own thought process there, and this is how Layer Zero started. As you've spent more and more time in this space, talk a little bit about what is your thesis for interoperability? Why do you think it's the core to the future of crypto itself?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's easy to look back in hindsight and be like, oh, of course we had this great idea. We saw it before anybody else saw it, right? It's like very easy to present that. But like to be honest, for us, it was a technology problem that we found very interesting. And ultimately, in the beginning, it was nothing more than we wanted to build this simple game, this toy game for ourselves, and couldn't do it in a way that we found acceptable and knew that like trust would scale to others. And so we just like our backgrounds prior a long time ago, we worked in IEEE testing and conformance for like early internet technology. So I was working on voice over IP, Caleb was working on DSL, Ryan was working on data center bridging. So like we had spent time around networking. We sort of like knew what this stack looked like. And our goal was to like recreate this base level packet, right? For us, everybody was focused on value transfer. It was this take a bag of money, walk across a bridge and just like have your money in the other chain. At first, we're like value transfer is just a special case of generic messaging, like solve for the generic messaging. And so we really I really try to stay super unopinionated on what the end state will be. I don't have a strong opinion on whether it will be a bunch of orthogonal layer ones or like Ethereum only as a settlement layer with a bunch of layer twos. For us, it doesn't matter. You need this layer of horizontal composability at the layer two level. And we see this actually Thesis playing out way more than I ever expected that it would. Ultimately, you need the same primitive. And so our goal is like, make the best possible version of that primitive, reinvent what the packet did for the internet when moving state between chains. And like that really is the goal more than anything. So we try to stay hyper unopinionated on what the evolution will be and make the thing that is useful and sort of maximum utility in all of the possible outcomes.
All right. I think that's helpful. And then maybe one interesting nugget there, right? I think it started when you were trying to make a simple toy game for yourselves and just realized how hard it was. I think that's an interesting nugget for, builders and founders out there to think about. Like, what is the problem that you face when you interact with crypto today? And that's maybe something to solve for, right? Like, I think the best ideas often come from personal experiences, and that's a great example of that. Maybe, moving on, well articulated, Bryan, would love to understand from you. There are a few interoperability protocols out there. Do you think LayerZero does differently, and that gives it an edge, right? Like, how does it really differentiate itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are really there's only a couple of vectors on how you measure, how we measure when we look at protocols, right? And ultimately, the number one thing by far is security. The number one largest vector of security is like upgradable contracts. I think by far, right? You look at all of the hacks that have happened, everything, like very few have been because the consensus has colluded and done something malicious. And a lot have been because people wrote bad code, people who were entirely benign, trying to upgrade the protocol, do something that they thought were good, then made a mistake or introduced a bug, and everybody who built on top of them suffered those security assumptions. So for us, there's only a couple ways to measure security. Really, in any protocol, it's how much value has been secured and how long has it been secured for, right? So why is Uniswap now? The reason is that contract has been hardened over years and years and years with billions or tens of billions of dollars within it. Nobody trusted it from day one immediately like that. It grew over time. And we see everything like that. So how big is a honeypot been for black hats and how long has it been around? Then you have your operational standards between what does your internal processes look like? What does your external audit process look like? We spent $5 million on audits last year alone. We've spent the most on audits of anybody in the entire world. And then it is, how much do you incentivize white hats to take the right action and have eyes on? We have the largest bug bounty in the world by more than 50% for anything in the entire world at $15 million. And so we see security across these multiple vectors. I think the largest difference is twofold. Every other messaging protocol is upgradable. And that is just systemic risk for everybody who uses it any day. And secondly, almost every other messaging protocol is this sort of middle chain construct where it's confirm a transaction on source chain. This chain inherits all security. It validates whether that's honest or dishonest, right or wrong, and then it writes out. And if that middle chain is ever corrupted, even for a matter of a couple of blocks, systemic risk. It can arbitrarily write transactions to every application on every chain. And so the underlying security of that piece needs to eclipse all applications on all paired chains. And that was one of our earliest theses is that would never scale. And so I don't want to I'm happy to dive down the technical rabbit hole on how we approach this problem, but we approach it in a very unique and novel way to sort of shard risk. And really, so one is the security approach. I think, again, if you look at the scale that we're operating now, securing 10 billion plus value, doing $15 billion in value transfer to the last 14 months, 2.6 billion on Stargate last month alone, 30,000 applications on testnet, 5,500 on mainnet. Like the scale of what's sort of like been at risk and been secured and just successfully been in the wild for a long time is nobody else is even close. And then from the usability perspective, one of the earliest things for us was like, if this space is going to scale and builders are going to scale with this technology, you have to be able to abstract the end user experience. It has to be such that a user coming from chain A, going to chain B, like it can't be back in the day when we started, the experience was like, sign a transaction on chain A, great, you paid Matic here. Wait, it lands on chain B. You now need to like go to a centralized exchange, get that gas, put it in your wallet, claim the transaction, execute the next leg on your own. And so we created this flow where like the user only ever pays once, only ever pays in source gas. The whole flow is executed. All of that's abstracted away for the end builder. And then the end builder takes that to the consumer and like creates a better experience.
Bryan, I think, I don't think anybody watching this would be a stranger to what LayerZero has achieved and just how much value you're securing today. Would love to understand from you what's next for LayerZero, right? Like what's the next technical frontier that you want to solve and that could really unlock even a bigger opportunity going ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for us and just like the way we think about the world internally is similar to what I talked about earlier, like create the maximum utility. At the moment, you look at market share and messaging, that TAM should grow over time as more chains come online, as all these things happen. But right now it's like 98% market share, like overall messaging. So great, that's there. How do you create products that enable that to grow? How do you make something that is better for the end users? So I put out a tweet today talking about like the scale that we're operating at, right? And I said in that tweet, I've never spoken about it, so the first time I'm speaking about it, but like, I said, LayerZero has like very publicly been one of the largest messaging protocols in the world. And everybody's watched that. What people haven't seen behind the scenes is that we have become one of the largest message delivery systems in the world. And like that language is very specific. We're now doing 500,000 messages, which are 1.5 million transactions per day. That's 15 billion RPC calls per month that we're already handling. So when you look at that, your average application who builds on a chain, right? Your Uniswap doesn't deal with needing to handle end flow, right? The user pushes a transaction to the RPC, the chain mines the transaction. LayerZero end to end has to deal with like full delivery, execution, all of this at scale. Now, once you have that message delivery system in place, what you can actually build on top of that, the constructs you can build on top of that are incredibly interesting. Now you can talk about, I don't want to dive too much into it. You can talk about a huge amount of primitives that you can create once you have that system and ability to operate at scale. And I think that is the thing that's really exciting for us. Like at the end of the day, we want to make the thing that has the most underlying usage, the thing that drives value to delivery to the end developers. And like for us, it's things that operate on an order of tens to hundreds of millions of messages annually. And so like all the products that we think about are how do we build the things that enable devs to do that and grow that overall market share.
Bryan, that's actually an excellent leading point into my next question, which was that let's push that thinking, right? Like LayerZero has really sort of fundamentally re-architected what was possible to build on blockchains before. There'll be a ton of devs and builders watching this. Maybe paint an example of what's truly possible with LayerZero. Like we get it that, you can sort of, it's a messaging system, but maybe make that more tangible, right? Talk about what kind of use cases are fundamentally possible because of the architecture that it's created that was not possible earlier.
Yeah, so I think that the low-hanging fruit is your natural, everyone thinks about value transfer, right? Swap on chain A, asset A on chain X to asset B on chain Y. Do that in a seamless flow. A little bit less intuitive than that is a higher order derivative. Collateralize or ETH on Ethereum, borrow some derivatives, borrow Sol on Solana, right? And have that cross mechanism in terms of like how debt is held, how that's handled between chains. The thing that interests me once you go a level above that are really two things. One is complete abstraction. The wallet that is entirely denominated in USDC, your Robinhood, your whatever of the world, as an end user who can interact with all of these products on every chain, and they have no idea what the underlying chain is, what the underlying gas asset is, nothing. Entirely gas abstracted. The concept of the chain, the concept of all of that is entirely beneath and abstracted away from the end user application. So that is already possible today to build. And that is very interesting to me. The other thing that is very interesting to me is like, historically, the way applications have been built have been completely monolithically. So like back in the day when we built computer applications, we would write them on a single server. I would host the server in my house. If I was lucky, I would put it in the data center and everything would live on that server. And that is the way we're at applications today. You have a single execution environment. Your application lives on that. And like, that's it. But if you look at how we write modern applications and in any application stack today, everything is microservices. You use services that are hyper optimized for compute, for throughput, for storage, for all of these things. And so there already is a world once you can propagate state and start to trigger events in these other places that you can have, you will never store everything that you want on Ethereum. Now you can have all of your storage on Arweave. You can bundle that up. You can do an extremely complex computation on Solana. You can take that result and propagate it to Ethereum, propagate it to all of the layer twos, move that across the sort of like stack of execution environments based on exactly what you're trying to do. And I think that enables and developers to do something that are like create applications that are orders of magnitude more complex than what we have today. That I never hear anybody else talk about. I'm very excited about. We'll see if like that world actually plays out. But like the things that you can do are incredibly interesting.
So let's talk about that, right? Why do you think that's something that people are not talking about? Like, why do you think that's not being built? What's coming in the way?
Yeah, I mean, right now, honestly, is that most activity, look at 95% of like Ethereum contracts that are deployed, like you're taking Master Chef that already exists and is hardened, you're forking it, and maybe you're making a small tweak, right? There's a lot of derivative of like core primitives that have been built on Ethereum, and that's fantastic. But then people take those primitives and then mutate them in like very, very, very small ways, right? The risk doesn't shift. When you're talking about doing that between a bunch of different stacks, like you're writing Solidity on Ethereum, then you're writing like, you're dealing with like Solana Rust, and your 5,000 lines of Solana code is compiling into like 25,000 lines of Rust that you need to deal with and like figure out how to secure it. And the interaction between those two and like every new environment adds this layer of complexity. And so like, I think that really is the largest thing is right now, people just aren't good cross-functionally. It's very hard to do that. People are creating more interesting applications that have some layers of complexity, but they're largely constrained to like between ETH and L2s or between multiple L2s or like within the same VM stack at the very least.
What do you think fundamentally needs to change for that limitation to go away?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the space is still figuring out, like I think Solana made some very interesting decisions in like trying to inherit Rust as its language, right? And if you do that and you get everybody else to kind of embrace Rust, you take this singular programming language that can be spread across like a bunch of different environments. The downside of that is like the nice thing about Solidity, about Move, etc., is that like you have this purpose-built language that maps one-to-one with the VM. When you go outside of that, you have like, you can write Rust kind of, but like only a certain amount of it actually compiles in like Solana VM. It's like, it becomes very messy. And so like, I think the knowledge gap is just like very large. And so I think people are still trying to figure out like what that end state looks like when you're making stark trade-offs between VMs. And then we're also making trade-offs on like the programming languages of each of these VMs.
Yeah. I think that's very well articulated, Bryan, and something maybe that resonates with us here at Lightspeed as well. It's a challenge that we've come across developers articulate when we ask them, what comes in the way of sort of cross blockchain applications today. I think it's a function of time and knowledge. I think that's pretty well articulated. Maybe, then coming back to it, look, you're a founder a lot of people look up to. LayerZero is I think an N of one company in many ways in the space. You're synonymous with interoperability in many ways. Today, when founders and builders come to you that, hey, this market is really harsh, the retail interest has been dropping. There's, of course, regulatory overhang, which we can't run away from. What is it that I should really build, right? What advice do you give them? And what advice generally do you have for builders and founders who are looking to, build in this market?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a story of where we did this wrong, and I'll tell you a story of where we did this right. And so back our first company we ever started, me and my two co-founders, we've been building together for 16 years. Our first company we ever started, we came in, we had no clue what we were doing, had zero clue how to build a business. We walked in this company that had raised $150,000. They had spent $110,000 of that on an external dev shop to build this website for them. Didn't work. So we came in, we took over, we threw that apart. We had $40,000 and we built this site. At the time in the space, there was 11 players. The next lowest after us had raised 2.5 million. The highest had raised 50 to 100 million. Fast forward 18 months later, we're third overall in revenue from all of these. Like, we're crushing in terms of efficiency. We have no clue how to raise money, can't raise another round. So we're like struggling to do that. And we came to this decision point where I wanted to continue building this thing. And I believe, like, let's just continue to work for free, eat all of the pain, and do this thing. And like, we will make it work. And like, we can see the traction that we're getting. My two co-founders basically made this decision of like, we don't want to keep working for free. Like, we don't know if this thing is going to work. We got this acquisition offer that was basically like investors get their money back. We get a pittance. So it was basically spin down the company as it gets like acquired or rolled up. Ended up getting convinced to take that offer. And 6 months later after that offer, people who were like 2 to 3 below us in revenue sold for $50 million plus, right? And so after that, Ryan, like one of my closest friend in the world, my co-founder, came to me and he said, the next time that we do something, I will bring my life to zero. Like, I will be 100% all in. I believe in our ability to do this. And so we went apart for a couple of years. I built some machine learning models for pro baseball teams, started another company, did all of this stuff. And we came back together, and we really, like, if you look at our journey, right? 2.5 years, $0 to $3 billion, like, everything, like, to think about that journey, every possible thing had to go right in most people's minds, right? That's as far right tail of an outcome as you can possibly get. That's everything aligning, all of the stars. And still, there were 8 different times in that journey that we could have killed this company and not done it. The years leading up to it, the years in the beginning of it, all of this. So the main thing that I would say, like, we didn't start this. We were not trying to build a company. Like I told you, we were building this toy thing for ourselves. It was interesting. It was the thing that, like, we obsessed over. I thought about when I got out of the shower. It kept me up at night. Like, and we would just go back and forth. Like, how would you actually design this thing? Like, oh no, this breaks here. Like, you can't do this. Like, oh, this was a really terrible. Like, why did other people design it in this way? And like, the best possible thing I can say is, don't, like, if you go out and your goal is like, I'm going to start a company, then like when it gets hard, you're going to be like, well, starting a company isn't as cool as I thought it was. And you're going to throw it away, right? Like, there will be so many times for you to quit that you will absolutely quit unless you have extremely high degrees of conviction. And so, like, the best possible advice that I can give is find the thing that you can't look away from. Find the thing that you're building because you want to build it, not because you believe it needs to exist in the world, not because like you think somebody else will like it or buy it from you or whatever. And so, like, if you don't have that level of conviction, you will find an excuse to quit before you ever realize all of the asymmetry and have the chance to have the success. So, like, the best possible advice that I can give is find the thing that you just cannot look away from. Make sure you have that internal conviction, and then it's easy. Once you've made that, it's easy to just run full steam. So for me, before I started this company, or before we realized, so we had worked on this for 8 months, just Ryan, Caleb, and I. We built the technology, we had done this, and I had to have a really real decision with myself. I'm like, do you want to do this again? You know how hard it is to build a real company. You know, like, you're going to eat all of this pain, do all these miserable things to put yourself in this maybe top 1%. And even then you only have a very small chance of like actually achieving this positive success, this right tail outcome. Is it worth it? And is there enough asymmetry that if you do hit that it like is compelling to you? And after I made that decision and really thought through it and said, like, you know what, it is worth it. I'm going to like really put everything into this, and we're just going to like do it. This is a thing that is going to be for real for us now. Then it was easy. Everything else was easy after that. But if I hadn't have done that, I cannot tell you the amount of times, like, we're working 80-hour weeks. Like, our wives are unhappy. You know, everything in life that can happen to a founder will happen. It's hard. It's gritty. It's just like not easy. And so, like, get yourself that conviction early, because you'll convince yourself to quit later, and then it's all just a waste.
Man, incredible. Absolutely incredible. Find something that you think needs to exist and have that conviction, and then go all in. I mean, that's a massive shot of motivation for anybody listening in. Incredible. Thanks for sharing that, Bryan. You know, want to end on a more happier note. Obviously, a ton of things that the industry could do better, some headwinds here. But what are you really excited about, right? Like, if you think about, hey, these are the cycles and pockets of innovation that I see that will fundamentally re-architect the experience of, how users experience Web3, rather, how users experience crypto. What really excites you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I'm going to give like the best answer to this. Obviously, like the thing that we're working on is still the thing that's most exciting to me. I feel like for a long time there were areas of the space over the last 10 years that I always had something I thought was very interesting. I feel like we've kind of had this lull outside of this interop problem of things that I thought were like very, very fascinating. I think people got very caught up in like optimistic messaging. I think people have gotten very caught up in like ZK and what it actually gives you and doesn't give you. And I think people still like wildly misunderstand a lot of this stuff. I think I think some of the zero knowledge stuff is very, very, very interesting. I think stuff like EigenLayer has become very interesting. I think there are very significant dangers that come with rehypothecation of stake, but like it is interesting, right? Like what it can do, there is something there that's compelling, but I do think again that introduces a lot of danger. So I think we're on the fringes of like a bunch of stuff that is reasonably interesting. I would not say I have anything that I think is super compelling right now. We've seen this like, okay, layer twos have happened, application specific blockchains have happened. Like most of this, like changing the way that we scale is starting to play out. I think the interactions of how that looked has been incredibly interesting for like our product specifically. Like again, our thesis was very different from what has played out in reality. But I don't think there's any piece of technology right now that I'm like that thing is amazing. I think most of the world is looking at AI, so everybody's paying attention to that. But like in the space, I'm waiting. I'm sure we'll have something again that gives me that. But right now, I don't have anything other than what I'm doing. That's like, man, that is like incredible.
Bryan, actually, I'm going to close this by respectfully disagreeing with you. When in 2020, if you just sort of look back at your own experience of dealing with blockchains, it was absolutely horrible. And you look at the developer experience today, you look at the user experience today, it's at least 10x better, if not more.
Yep.
Things like LayerZero have fundamentally rechanged the experience, like what applications can do, what developers can do, and what users experience. And that's an incredible pace of growth in 3 years. And this has happened despite the headwinds that we've faced for over a year at this point. So the industry in many ways is, of course, facing headwinds, but in many ways also to the up and to the right. I'm incredibly excited by what LayerZero achieves, what you achieve, and what the whole ecosystem achieves. And all it needs is builders who are obsessed about finding the thing, as you said, that should exist and give it their all. So yeah, to many more such builders and to many more such conversations. Thanks a lot for joining us, Bryan. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you.
Awesome. I appreciate that a ton. And, those builders are who we're here for. So I completely agree.
Awesome. All right. This has been great. Thank you for having us over.